we've seen through our utilities, improved litter pickup, and our comprehensive graffiti plan that we're trying to do. All of these components, quite frankly, I believe that the city are working with the right values and the right commitment, with the right energy level to get our city where it needs to be.
Well, that's Mayor Bruce Harrell talking about revitalizing downtown, and one piece of that, a plan to clean up graffiti. It's getting a jump start this week. What impact will that program have? And what's the latest on the dual dispatch proposal, the launch of a 911 alternative system that's been delayed several times over the past year and a half? Plus, did Seattle get cleaned up enough last week to get ready for the All-Star Game? Well, we're cleaning up our act here, getting ready to discuss these topics and more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine, and I'm joined once again with my co-host, David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I saw a very interesting tweet from you a few days ago, as I often do. Are people really using ChatGPT to write their wedding toast? What in the world is going on here?
Yeah, I don't know if they are or not, but that's what they're selling it as, which to me is I'm not a ChatGPT fan. I think it's stripping us of our creativity, and so it was a little disheartening to see that being advertised.
I thought the same, man. It's like, when are we going to get a good chance for human embarrassment? Like, let the toasting begin.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
a very important thing. Well, David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons, and to those not supporting the show. I know you're out there listening, so why not get on board here? Your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal could soon be coming your way if you can jump in at the $5 level and actually send in a photo of your sticker in action. We've seen it on coffee cups, refrigerators, the whole thing. We'll feature it on the show. Always a good time there. And we can't do this without patrons, so please and thank you for your support. And a big thank you to Converge Media, too. Converge airs the video version of this podcast Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get rolling with right here, right now. Another busy week for Seattle city government, land use especially, a public hearing over relaxing design standards for affordable housing, which we've talked about, looking into adding rooftop patios in Pioneer Square. We'll delve into that further on down the line. But David, I really wanted to discuss the mayor's graffiti abatement program. He's launching that this week, relaunching it, I should say, as a bit of an update on some drama from a few weeks ago. You will remember, folks, U.S. District Court Judge Marcia Peckman ruled that police could not make arrests for graffiti under Seattle's current vandalism law. Some concerns over free speech there, which are still in question. But that doesn't mean the mayor can't swoop in and work on cleaning things up, which he is doing this week with his relaunch of the graffiti abatement team in the downtown and Chinatown ID neighborhoods. David, I know there was a lot of confusion over this a few weeks ago when this ruling came out, but what do you make of the mayor's plan to basically blow past that legal question and just get to the cleanup here?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, that ruling meant that they couldn't make arrests for people doing graffiti, but I think I saw somebody, maybe someone from The Stranger, had posted the numbers of arrests that actually happened because of graffiti, and it was, it's in the low double digits, I think, maybe even the teens. So it's not like there are huge numbers of people getting arrested for this. So, in some ways, it doesn't really, I don't know that, graffiti was a big part of Mayor Harrell's campaign and Ann Davison's campaign. And I don't think it was ever really about making like a bunch of arrests necessarily. I think it was just this sort of caretaking approach. We're going to, get crews out there to scrub this off of walls and paint over and things like that. And so, this ruling doesn't really get in the way of doing that.
Sure. And I mean, I will say from the mayor's office, at least the statistics they're sending out, they're saying Seattle has a surge in graffiti, up 50% since 2019, 20,000 reports of tagging in 2021. There's a temp agency, Uplift Northwest, 3 crews out and about working with city departments like Parks and Seattle Public Utilities to get things cleaned up. We're going to talk a little bit more about city cleanup activities a bit later in the show. But David, I wanted to dovetail into another topic on this. This work by the mayor really made me think about the poll results released last weekend that showed the mayor's approval rating up over 57%, but the city council down around 34%. However, about 2/3 of the people in the Seattle Times Suffolk University poll still believe Seattle is a good or excellent place to live. I wanted to get your take on those polling numbers, especially with what's going on with the mayor there.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think he has basically been the mayor that I think he said he would be. Not that involves a ton of very specific policy proposals, but he's said he wasn't going to start fights, and he hasn't really. He and the city council have basically, at least publicly, had a pretty good relationship, and he I think kind of walks this line that I do think most of Seattle wants between police. He was never a defund the police guy. He was never a decriminalize drugs guy, but he also isn't seen as a super tough on crime type. And so I think there's still some questions around specifics of what he's going to do at this time in office. But as far as his general vibe, I suppose he is basically the person that people elected him to be. I also think these polls have consistently shown a split between the mayor and the city council. I don't know if there was ever publicized, but I think it was a similarly, maybe not quite as big of a gap, but there was a gap between Jenny Durkin and the city council, that she was seen as much more popular than they were. I think some of that is that dynamic that you get when, if you ask people what they think of Congress, for example, it's 20% approval, but if you ask people what they think of Pramila Jayapal, it's a much higher approval. And so the questions are asking about a legislative body versus an individual. So I think to a certain extent, there's probably the city council loses some points on that. I think some of that is a lot of people equate Shyama Sawant maybe with the city council, or on the other side, maybe equate Alex Peterson with the city council.
Sure.
And so it sort of becomes a Rorschach test when you ask people about that maybe they would gravitate towards their least favorite person on the city council and define them in that way. So I would be I wouldn't be interested to see polling results on individual council people. My hunch is they would still be less popular than Bruce Harrell, but
sure,
I don't know that the gap would be quite as wide. I think 57%, and I can't remember what the disapproval rating was. It was pretty low. Those are really good numbers for Bruce Harrell. Suggesting that if there was an election next week, he would easily win re-election, which that's interesting to see.
Yeah, a lot of tests ahead, and when the council turns over, we're talking about 7 positions here that are up for election coming up here in November. When that council turns over, I think that'll be a very defining moment for the Harrell administration, who has talked a lot about One Seattle and working with the council. He's tried that, but I really thought those numbers were interesting, and I think you're right. Andrew Lewis brought up that point, too, about that 20% congressional approval rating there, and when you have 9 different people to pick from there's one of them you probably don't like, so there's a reason behind some of those polling numbers there for sure. I wanted to work on another issue that the mayor's been kind of dragging his feet on a little bit here, a dual dispatch program to set in place some 911 alternatives for low acuity calls. These are calls that don't need a armed officer out there. The mayor's office is making a presentation about this to the city council's public safety committee at just about the time we're recording this podcast, David, and it looks like there's some progress being made here. We're seeing that Seattle Police and Fire are going to be involved. Along with those 2 response agencies, we will also have the Community Safety and Communication Center, the CSCC, which will be working with the social outreach group known as CARE. So, David, it looks like to me that the mayor's office is aiming for a team of about 6 responders here using 3 vehicles with a clinical supervisor to be ready to go by October of this year. And I know details are just coming together on this, but my question is this big one here. What is it going to take make this program successful? What do you think that looks like?
Yeah, I think it looks like needing a lot of clarity and specific sort of operating procedure. I do think the dispatch question has been kind of the most underrated difficulty of having an alternative police force, or some kind of alternative to law enforcement, because that's the point at which, in theory, you would sort of make the distinction between something that needs an officer with a gun and something that doesn't. And so I think coming up with a program that works is going to take, it's just, it can't fall into confusion, because if it does, then you are going to have instances where the wrong person is showing up to the wrong kind of scene, and someone could end up being hurt, or, either because an officer overreacts or because maybe they needed an officer and didn't get one, whatever it might be. So, I think I don't know a ton about what the specifics of this are going to look like once it's up and running, but it's just going to, for it to function well, it's going to have a lot of clarity and precision on who it's sending where and when.
Yeah, a lot of oversight there too. And I think the next step may also be, David, kind of building public awareness of this dual dispatch program, because the mayor's office says it's going to coordinate with the Department of Neighborhoods to make that happen. And I just feel like that's another piece of this puzzle about where will these dual dispatch crews be going. Sending them out in an equitable way is kind of where I'm getting here, David. How do you do that? I just don't think that's going to be easy with a small team. I wonder how that's going to go.
No, yeah, not easy. And even if you had a bigger team, how do you find and keep people to continue to do that work and train them properly?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the risk, I think, on some of these. A couple of years ago, and I was writing a little bit more about this, somebody described some of what the city's programs are as boutique-y, which is, small programs that are interesting and have promise, but are not built out to handle anything close to like what a fire department or a police department does.
Sure.
And so the risk here is you kind of over promise and under deliver, in which case people lose faith in alternatives to policing at all, not necessarily because it's inherently flawed, but just because it was never set up in a way to function on a sort of broad scale.
Agreed. And I will say I'm interested to see how this turns out, because in looking at the presentation here from the mayor's office, consultations going on with departments up and down all over the city of Seattle and across the country too. So 70 different organizations weighing in on this. And I think the mayor's office is trying to proceeding with caution, of course. This is going to be a bit of a pilot program in the late summer, and it looks like the full launch is supposed to be in October of this year. So that's the first time we've seen that date set in that way. So we'll see what happens next on that one. All right, up next, cleaning up Seattle prior to the All-Star Game. Hundreds of people pitched in to make it happen last weekend. What effect will this work actually have? We are considering that question next on Now Hear This. Well, in case you missed it, a big cleanup effort around T-Mobile Park, ostensibly to spruce things up before the All-Star Game, attracted 400-plus volunteers this past Friday. The Mariners, along with the civic group Together Washington and the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, made it happen. They're dispatching 35 teams across SoDo, Chinatown, Pioneer Square, and other areas to clean up trash. What was accomplished? Well, Aaron Goodman, executive director of the SoDo Business Improvement Area, who was one of these volunteers, told reporters last week this was a good step forward, but it was just a small step, too.
We're not there yet. It's getting better. We had nothing moved, nothing cleaned up. The city did nothing for 2.5 years. And so while we have seen significant progress under this administration, there's just a lot that didn't get done that we need to attend to.
David, I thought this was an interesting move by groups like the Metro Chamber and Together Washington to organize this cleanup. There were so many opinions flying around on this one, like Seattle's just trying to sweep its homelessness issue under the rug, or the city's making some progress and has some good volunteers trying to help out. How did you see this? What was your take on this story?
Yeah, I think it's probably an effort at kind of community building and getting some buy-in to the All-Star Game. I think for the mayor and downtown groups in particular, Downtown Seattle Association, Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, I think there's a lot of importance being put on this All-Star Game. Seattle's reputation, has probably taken a hit, fairly or unfairly in national media, and it has become sort of a bit of a punching bag for right-wing media and that sort of thing. And so I think there's a lot of hope being put on sort of what this can do for the city's reputation. I think there's always questions for me about sort of volunteerism and how that intersects with what the duty of the city should be versus people who are just out there kind of deciding on their own what's dirty and what needs cleaning and that sort of thing. I think there's always a little hesitancy around that.
Sure.
In this case, I don't think there's, my senses. I mean, it wasn't there. My senses, it's sort of, picking up trash and, sort of like an adopt a highway program or whatever, but around T-Mobile. So, I don't know that there's I don't know how much more to read into it than that, except for that.
Yeah.
I do think you just kind of get the sense from the mayor's office and from a lot of these downtown groups that they really see this event as an important one for the city.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it leads me to that other question of, is Seattle ready for an all-star game? Of course, there was one at the Kingdome back in 1979. I think I have that right. And of course, 2001, when it was still Safeco Field, when it opened up. And Seattle is a different place right now for sure. And I guess that's my bigger question is Seattle ready for this all-star game? And does this whole idea of the need for a city cleanup, does that become a storyline when the Midsummer Classic rolls in on July 7th for All-Star Week?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it might be. I think it becomes a local storyline. I don't know that it becomes a national one. I mean, all cities are dealing with. I mean, COVID was terrible for cities. It was in particular downtowns. And
they weren't able to move camps around. That was not advised by the CDC. And I think a lot of we haven't done anything for the past several years. There's a lot of sentiment about that. But I think the pandemic is at least, there's some reasons behind that, I guess.
Yeah. And, the storefronts are emptier and there's just not the same level of vibrancy yet. I mean, I think that's improving and it's changing, but, it's in some ways, it's kind of a risky time to be a city hosting an all-star game because you are, I don't know that I think there's acknowledgement that things are improving, but I don't know that anyone would argue that Seattle is looking at its best as it has, and there's lots of reasons for that. But so the timing of how this event sort of dovetails with cleanup and revitalization efforts that are ongoing and still in their sort of early stages, that's an interesting intersection. I'm sure it'll be a topic of conversation, at least locally. I think most of the focus nationally is going to be around the actual sporting event. I would be surprised if they talk about Seattle's homelessness crisis or whatever, but you never know.
Yeah, true. And I'm hoping they can focus on at least one Mariner in the mix there. I think Luis Castillo has a good chance to jump on that roster, but that's been difficult to watch those voting totals too. So people, I don't know what happened. But that was a rough vote for the Seattle Mariners, at least. I wanted to look at another way of cleaning up our streets, if you will, David, in a different way from Seattle City Light. A very interesting twist, as I saw it, in the City Light Committee meeting this week. The council's looking at Ordinance 96796. This was passed back in 1968, which requires that all the wiring you see overhead in the First Hill neighborhood for phones, cable, etc., that should be undergrounded. And that's happened with about 20% of the wiring in this neighborhood. But now there's a need to update electric service to a 4-block area around Harrison and John. There's just a bigger demand for electricity and connectivity in our high-tech world. And City Light has a problem here. If all that wiring is required to go underground, that's going to cost ratepayers a ton. Plus, those ratepayers are the one who have to pay to get a trench to go out there and connect with the service. City Light is saying, hey, City Council, give us the discretion as to whether we put these wires underground or not. We can do overhead wiring just as safely. And David, I know I am well down a rabbit hole here, but I found this clash between let's get all these wires out of the neighborhood and underground up against the tech is changing too quickly and we can't really afford it anyway. It just seemed like a very interesting modern problem to me.
Yeah, it is interesting. This was all kind of new to me. I don't know that I think it is sort of best practice to have wiring underground. It's not super attractive to have these tangles of wires above your city, and
doesn't
it's
look
not good. Yeah, and if there's storms, then branches fall into them and knock out power. It's that, and then that costs money. So you can understand why it's important to put them underground. At the same time, I think City Light is and will continue to be under a lot of pressure. It's at an interesting time as a utility, just as far as sustainability goes, because buildings are more efficient, and there's probably some climate questions. So their revenues, they already are looking at sort of a long-term, in some ways, existential issue around sustainability, and so there's going to be revenue hikes that have to come with that, and so to sort of come to these issues which feel important but maybe a little more discretionary, you can kind of understand why they would want to maybe back burner that, understanding that there's probably going to be other pressures on revenue on rates already, in addition to putting wires underground.
Yeah, and I think it intersects with so many other issues too, David, because if you end up tearing those utility poles down, then hey, we got to close down this street for a certain amount of time. Boy, that's bad for traffic. And then I thought this was a little bit hopeful, but it was in the City Light presentation here. Changing this law may actually facilitate the building of additional affordable housing. And I just wonder about that, about the greater impact of something like this down the road when it comes to traffic, when it comes to affordable housing, because I think those are pieces of this too.
Yeah, I agree. And people kind of underestimate the role that utility hookups and utilities have in getting housing built and online. I know for a while ago, it was like a 6-month backup on just getting utility hookups for new homes, and that alone was delaying new homes from coming online. And so, in a city like Seattle that's desperately in need of housing quickly, any sort of hang up, any sort of complexity sort of in that process delays it from getting online. I don't know if I don't know if this issue would necessarily lead to delays, but it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, it would be something that would contribute for sure. So we'll see how that committee vote goes this week on that issue. We'll see how the council engages that over the next week or so. But I did want to talk about something else coming up here. The story that had the world's attention over the past week, the tragedy of the Titan submersible. David's done some reporting on this, and we're going to break it down on Transportation Talk. David, you and your colleagues, Mike Riker and Lauren Rosenblatt, wrote a story for the Seattle Times about some of the events leading up to the recent deadly voyage of the Titan submersible. It sounds like some of the predecessors of this craft, built here in Puget Sound region, had some red flags that concerned a lot of researchers. What did you find out?
Yeah, it's interesting. Anytime there's some kind of disaster like this, you kind of do a little retrospection and see if this is something we should have known was coming. So it's an Ever-based company, so that's why the paper has taken an interest in it. Obviously, lots of national media attention on the actual crash near the Titanic, but we were sort of interested in how this business got established here and how it functioned here, because we knew that they had done quite a few dives in Puget Sound and around San Juan. So, we revisited, in particular, these 2018 dives that happened in the San Juans. This is the submersible before the Titan.
The Cyclops,
Cyclops, yeah. They put out a call to scientists to apply to use their submersible for research if they wanted. A few people reached out, got accepted. But, when we checked in with, and, at the time there was a lot of coverage, the Seattle Times wrote a story about it, and other outlets did stories about this dive, and it was sort of celebrated as this positive thing. But, when we talked to people, it turned out there were actually quite a few safety concerns that had come up at the time, because some of these researchers had spent a lot of time in submersibles elsewhere and sort of kind of knew what it should feel like. And what we heard from them was this felt less like a sort of scientific project and more like a startup or a fly by the seat of their pants organization. And that, I think, for pretty serious researchers, that was concerning. There were issues around navigation, there was issues around propulsion system, lack of confidence that they understood the currents in the San Juans.
Yeah, right. Those deep currents
to deal with that. And so, the Cyclops, was not Titan, and it was built differently. So it's not a 1-to-1 correlation. But when you hear about stuff like this, you start to question just kind of the general ethos of the company and how seriously they were taking safety versus kind of thinking of this as a profit-making venture and trying to do it as cheaply and quickly as they could.
And another piece to this, David, and I think you're kind of going in this direction, this idea of certifying these craft. This was something that OceanGate, they didn't want to do that. They said, our standards are even better than what you're considering. Help me out with that part, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand either. These weren't certified in a proper way, either Cyclops or the Titan.
Yeah, it's an interesting process too, because there's not like one central certifying body, but it's kind of best practice in this world to submit yourself voluntarily to some kind of certification process, which means you have some body looking over your shoulder and doing regular inspections. Cyclops said that, or OceanGate said that their standards were higher than that, but that sort of requires you're taking their word for it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And one person I talked to said he's taken hundreds of dives, and almost none of them have been in uncertified crafts. And some of the places that he worked for, including the United States Geological Survey, wouldn't generally let him get into uncertified boats. And so,
Right.
Things aren't a problem until they are. And so, who knows if it's the lack of certification that led to this tragedy? But I think it's kind of one piece of a larger picture of this company as seen as putting safety and those kinds of precautions maybe second or third behind affordability and profitability. And that's part of why we are where we are, perhaps.
Yeah. What does it do to this whole quest tonight? Because I know it still exists for people to be going down to the ocean's floor, et cetera, and some of these different startup companies that do that. I have to imagine this puts it at least a pall on that, a chill on that, for that activity to happen. Do you have a feel for that at all? That industry writ large?
Yeah, I think. I mean, my sense is it'll probably have a chilling effect on the tourism part of it, and maybe that's okay. I think when you talk to scientists and researchers, there are submersibles out there that they feel really confident and good about that have been used over and over without issue. And so I think most scientists and researchers probably would feel pretty comfortable going down. And, Alvin is kind of the main one, or some of these French subs that are engineered to the max. Of course, it all costs a lot more money, but they feel pretty confident about it. But as far as the industry of sort of trying to create affordable-ish like tourism to places like Titanic, then I would imagine this has a chilling effect on it, and perhaps rightly so.
Yeah. Boy, so interesting to see that play out. I guess I should ask, have you ever been on a submersible before as we wrap up here, David? And the submarine ride, the old submarine ride at Disneyland does not count. What do you got?
No, I have not. I scuba dived once. Scubaed once, but that was as much time as I've ever spent underwater.
Wow. Yeah, I was able to go on one of the nuclear subs out at Bangor at the Naval Air Station out there. We didn't actually get underway, but just being on board that craft and just being surrounded by that, I mean, and, of course, one of the top vessels in the world when you talk about what's being built there, it does have that effect, though, of kind of pressing in on you. And I felt that even when it was not underway. And it's just such a terrifying story with the Titan here. And I appreciate your reporting on it. Very difficult to hear that news. But I got to say, that was some great reporting there. I'm glad you were able to provide that.
Thanks.
And thank you, David. As always, thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon, folks. We need you. Show your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media 2. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.